Who is it?
We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified on playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to GB News Sunday. Thank you very much for joining us this lunchtime. I'm Darren Grimes, and for the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up this hour, as Jeremy Hunt teases tax cuts, many are wondering whether the autumn statement will finally be what gets the economy growing on all, firing on all cylinders. Will it happen, folks? I'll be asking if Hunt's measures really can solve Britain's economic woes, dire as they are. And as TikTok removes posts championing Osama bin Laden's views, I'm not joking, on the Israeli-Palestine conflict, they're widely circulated by left-wing commentators. I'm going to be asking what social media companies are doing to keep our young people safe, and if such content should even be allowed at all. And as the NHS offers an £100,000 contract for tackling anti-racism, I'll be investigating whether our National Health Service really is caring for us all, or if, frankly, woke activists are taking advantage of the bloated budget of the healthcare system. And do get in touch, your view's much more important than mine. gbviews@gbnews.com or send us a message on our socials. We're at @gbnews. But first, here's the news with Aaron.
Very good afternoon to you. It's a minute past 1. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The Chancellor says the government is acting responsibility amid suggestions tax cuts will be announced in next week's autumn statement. Jeremy Hunt told GB News he won't introduce any kind of measure that risks fuelling inflation after it was halved over the past year. It comes amid speculation that cuts to inheritance and income tax are being considered in an effort to boost the economy. But the Chancellor insists next week's statement will focus on growth.
We're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation, because we had a big victory last week when we delivered the Prime Minister's pledge to halve inflation. When he and I came to office, it was over 11%. Now it's 4.6%. People watching at home, their number one concern, they say in poll after poll, is the cost of living crisis. This makes a difference. So we're going to do this responsibly.
Well, Labour's criticised suggestions the government may cut taxes while also squeezing the welfare system when many people are struggling with the cost of living. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, says he wants to know how any tax cuts will be paid for.
We've said in the Labour Party that we want the tax burden to come down on working people. It's the highest it has been since the Second World War. We've had 25 Conservative tax rises in this Parliament alone, but we can only announce those tax cuts when they can be fully funded. And if the Chancellor is going to announce a tax cut on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at how he's been able to get the money to pay for that to happen.
Homeowners could be offered up to £1,000 per year off their household bills if they're prepared to live near new electricity pylons. The government's hoping the move will overcome planning objections and speed up its bid to install infrastructure for electric vehicles. The current estimate is 14 years. It could be worth up to £10,000 over a decade for some, although the Treasury hasn't specified where the money will come from. A woman who acted as a fixer for people smugglers has been jailed for 7.5 years. 32-year-old Ujeza Kermekaj, who's from Albania, helped arrange small boat crossings from France to the UK for Albanian nationals. She was arrested at her home in Oxfordshire last year and will be deported upon her release from prison. 700,000 pupils in England are still being taught in poorly maintained or potentially unsafe buildings because of crumbling concrete. The Public Accounts Committee says it's limiting students' educational achievements. In its report, the cross-party group described a shocking lack of detail from the Department of Education, meaning the true scale of the crisis remains a mystery. The government, though, says its rebuilding programme is proceeding ahead of schedule. A Conservative MP who was found guilty of racial abuse has announced he's standing down at the next election. Bob Stewart racially abused a man after he allegedly told him to go back to Bahrain outside the Foreign Office last December. He surrendered the Tory whip while he appealed against his conviction. The MP for Beckenham made no reference to the recent case, but said it had been an honour and a privilege to serve. Minibuses and electric vehicles have been sent to Albania as part of a deal to return foreign prisoners. The arrangement will see 200 Albanian nationals currently jailed in England and Wales sent back home for the rest of their sentence. The UK's also agreed to help modernise Albania's prison system. The overall deal is expected to cost around £8 million, which the government says will save money for Britain's prisons. And the biggest prostate cancer screening trial in decades begins today. After a £42 million funding boost, the innovative trial uses methods like MRI scans to detect cancer much earlier. Thousands of men across the country are participating, with 1 in 10 to be from non-white communities who are much more at risk. Oncologist Carol Sikora says it's good news.
The problem we've got is that men don't come forward. You know, women are much better at coming forward with symptoms. They access their GPs better. And as you know, it's quite a challenge to get to see your GP now. And many men with a few urinary symptoms just pack up. They get bored of the whole thing and don't bother. And so often prostate cancer is delayed. And that's the key. And this trial, which is called Transform, is about seeing how it can be applied to a real huge cohort, millions of men around the country.
Well, we are also around the country on your TV, on digital radio, and if you want us on your smart speaker, say play GB News. Now back to Darren.
Cheers very much, Aaron. Let's get stuck into today's topic, shall we? Could we be expecting tax cuts in light of the Chancellor indicating, teasing us all, that he could reduce business levies to boost economic growth? Jeremy Hunt said difficult decisions to reform the welfare state are required as he considers squeezing benefits by billions while slashing inheritance tax. But after being burned once by Liz Truss's mini-budget, can the markets handle more tax-slashing measures? Well, speaking to Camilla Tominey earlier, the Chancellor had this to say.
That if we're going to be a dynamic, thriving, energetic, fizzing economy, we need low tax and we need taxes to be lower than they are at the moment. And the reason I believe that is if you look around the world, the most dynamic, successful economies at the moment are in North America and Asia, where they tend to have lower taxes. But we're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation, because we had a big victory last week when we delivered the Prime Minister's pledge to halve inflation. When he and I came to office, it was over 11%. Now it's 4.6%. People watching at home, their number one concern, they say in poll after poll, is the cost of living crisis. This makes a difference. So we're going to do this responsibly. And then the second thing is my priority on Wednesday is growth, because having made good progress on inflation, we can move to the next part of our plan, which is to unlock much higher levels of growth.
Joining me now is Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. Vicky, thank you very much for your time. How is this different to what was proposed by Liz Truss, which ultimately was her undoing?
Well, the interesting thing about the Liz Truss mini-budget, or rather the quasi-quadeng one, which was back in September 2022, was that it didn't rely at all on what the Office of Budget Responsibility would have told them if they had listened to that independent body, which does all the fiscal calculations, if you like, for any financial statement that is made by the government. They would have told them that 45 extra billion of unfunded tax cuts and other types of spending would not have met any of the fiscal rules that had been set by Liz Truss's predecessor and which had been kept actually, or at least on paper, by quite a lot of other chancellors before. So that was the real difference, that in this case, we will have the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is calculating what type of headroom there is for the Chancellor to give something back. And then the question, of course, is that headroom going to survive, let's say, another downturn in the economy or any other shocks? But at least there is some sort of justification, if you like, behind the figures that the Chancellor is going to talk about this week.
And Vicky, the Labour Party have obviously been out this morning to respond. Darren Jones was on this very channel speaking to Camilla Tominey earlier. Is there much difference between policies proposed by the Labour Party and what's been touted potentially by the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt?
That's very interesting. The Labour Party has been actually calling for a rethink on income tax, which is something that's been hinted now by the Chancellor, in the sense that the freezing of personal allowances have hurt quite a lot of people. Millions are coming into paying the tax in the first time ever, in other words, paying any tax, the 20p tax basic rate. And millions are also coming into paying the higher rate of income tax at a time when the cost of living crisis has hit them, at a time when interest rates have been very high, so squeezing personal disposable incomes. So Labour would like to see some of that addressed, and I think there is a hint, everything we've heard from the Chancellor so far, that may be addressed, because otherwise personal allowances, yes, pensions is another issue, are going to be frozen for a few more years on current trends. So probably he'll say something about what he intends to do, maybe easing that and bringing the time scale for when those become unfrozen a lot earlier. But of course, frankly, we may have a different government, and Labour may want to speed that up anyway if they come to power.
So do you think both parties are focusing on the fact that you've got, whether it be head teachers, senior nurses, being dragged into higher rate tax bands?
Yes, that worries them, but also, of course, what's going to happen to benefits. Because the other hint we're getting is that perhaps benefits aren't going to go up in line with the inflation that we had in September, which was 6.4%, but we might instead go for the one in October, which is only 4.6%. And if that is the case, then obviously benefits are not going to rise in line, and lots of people who need those benefits are working people who rely on that quite a lot. So I think that is also another difference. Yes, indeed, Labour is worried about this. But of course, as Rachel Reeves has said quite clearly, the inheritance tax proposals, or rather, again, as perhaps speculation that there could be a change in inheritance tax, either perhaps halving it or dropping it altogether, is not something that they would want to see happen, because that's not where money perhaps needs to be spent right now.
Well, just finally then, Vicky, on that very point, is there any argument that the economy would be boosted by a cut in inheritance tax?
The interesting thing about it is that it's probably the least costly thing that the government can do. Well, it might cost it, $1 or $2 billion a year, possibly, and it isn't really going to make very much difference, but it will go down well, I think, with the Conservative voting population and also with the right-wing MPs in the Conservative Party. And I think that's why it's being mentioned and mentioned again.
All right, Vicky Price, thank you very much as ever for your thoughts. That's Vicky Price there, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. Now, let's see what my panel think of this today. I'm joined by Christian Calgi, who is a political commentator at The Express, and the political commentator Matthew Stadlin. Matthew, I'll start with you. I mean, where are you at on the difference between the two political parties, if indeed you recognise one, when it comes to taxation?
So I think the most important difference is inheritance tax, because, as Vicky said there, I think that Sunak and Hunt have been signalling to the right wing of the party and also to the Tory members themselves. I don't think they're going to do anything this time around. They may do in the spring, just ahead of an election. The reason they won't do anything at the moment is because actually, although some people might vote for it for aspirational reasons, actually cutting inheritance tax is only going to help a very, very tiny percentage of the British population at a time when we know that this year, I think something like 11 million of us have been struggling to pay our bills. It's very interesting listening to the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt there talking about our desire for a fizzing, dynamic economy. Everyone wants a fizzing, dynamic economy. He said the key to that is a low-tax economy. People should remember that the tax yield in Britain is the highest in 70 years. It's been the highest for 7 decades, and that is under a Conservative government.
Christian, I'm wondering then, I mean, I realise that this is the sop to the true blue grassroots, right? And inheritance tax, cutting that would be immensely popular. But is this indicative of a government that has decided that they're absolutely up something creek without a paddle when it comes to the red wall, and that actually they need to focus on Surrey and not Sunderland?
It certainly plays into that, and I've spoken to a lot of the sort of Trussite Tory MPs, and there is a big divide on inheritance tax, and it is along that blue wall, red wall line. I think most people accept that it doesn't affect many people. It only really kicks in if you're getting £1 million or more inheritance from your parents. But I think that's why the government are doing it. As your previous guest pointed out, it doesn't cost much because it doesn't affect many people, but it is the most unpopular tax. So it's a very easy political move. And, the reverse side of that is I would suggest that the single most important thing any government should be doing at the moment is reversing what's called fiscal drag, which is where you freeze the income tax bands and then people get dragged into the higher rates, as you were talking about. Now, that, conversely, is a very expensive policy and not one many people understand. So there's not much of a political incentive. But all of this seems to go completely against the so-called long-term decision-making that Rishi Sunak was going for, and we're back into
well, surely that's what you would like to see,
The interesting thing about fiscal drag, right, is that is the equivalent of a tax rise, and people feel it as such, even if they don't understand necessarily, because this is a sort of complicated economics, don't necessarily understand that it's happening to them. Don't underestimate the political power of inheritance tax, even though, as Christian rightly says, it affects so few people. The reason it's powerful is, I think, that word I used earlier, aspirational. People think it might affect them, it might apply to them. Let's remember, back in, when was it, 2007, when Gordon Brown became Prime Minister. It was a sort of succession, or seen as such, from Tony Blair. George Osborne, who was the Shadow Chancellor at the time, he said that he was going to raise the threshold at which inheritance tax would kick in, and it is widely thought that Brown was so scared of that and the electoral pulling power of that he didn't call an early general election, and I don't think voters ever forgave him for that.
Well, I remember the death tax warning, right? And they had the Conservative Party had these adverts with a headstone and all the rest of it.
Yes.
I'm wondering, it is really an emotive tax, but things like stamp duty, for example, the property market does have a lot of pressures, and as you well know, because I know you wax lyrical about property pressures all the time, Christian, we're not building enough homes. People can't get on the housing ladder, so we do need to look at ways in which we can help out. That was Boris Johnson's argument in the Daily Mail.
Yes, and well, I think Boris was slightly wrong because he said a cut in inheritance tax would help Gen Z. It might in 2070, but not at the moment. But it's this sort of debate that gets me really depressed about the state of politics, especially the state of the Tory party, because they're so locked into this idea that the way you get the economy growing is by spending money or fiddling with taxes, when actually there are big things, as you alluded to, changing the planning system, which wouldn't cost anything, to the Treasury and would kickstart growth in this country, and yet there just isn't the political bottle in Number 10 to grasp that nettle.
Just want to make a quick point here about vulnerable people, OK? It may be unfashionable to talk about this, but I said earlier that at least some point this year, roughly 11 million of us have been struggling to pay our bills because of the cost of living, and of course with inflation, high interest rates were pushed up, so people might be hit in terms of when they're going to the shops, but also when it comes to paying their mortgage every month. There is talk of slashing benefits, or certainly of cutting benefits. That is a real prospect. And let's remember that people who are on benefits are in work, many of them, some of them are out of work, but whoever it is, that they can be very, very vulnerable to a slashing of their benefits. And I think the Conservative Party should be very, very careful. Otherwise, they're just going to be known as the nasty party, and they will switch off, one would imagine, if people are thinking properly, great swathes of people in those so-called red wall, now perhaps blue wall seats in the parts of the country that you come from, Darren, a lot of people really struggling, and the Tories have to be very careful about that.
But equally, the Conservative voters in 2019, and I get email after email about this when this debate comes up, saying actually what needs to happen is to ultimately make work pay, right? Because a lot of people are saying, I could have made more money if I was on benefits, right? If I just stayed at home. And that's why people get trapped in this welfare dependency. That's what Jeremy Hunt is talking about, is it not?
Yes, absolutely. But the problem is the Conservatives have not made work pay for a very long time. I mean, I sometimes, you see job adverts in America, you can earn $150,000 from running a petrol station, in the middle of nowhere. We just have such poverty wages in this country. And that's partly because I think we've got these still slightly sort of warlike obsession with austerity and rationing and that sort of thing. And we don't like to boast and we don't like to negotiate and play hardball too much. But, and it also the other flip side is, of course, we keep house prices high and then we pay a load out in housing benefit. And it's this sort of never-ending cycle of welfare, subsidy, spending, high taxes. And I think this is why Labour have been able to manoeuvre themselves into this remarkable situation of sounding more pro-supply-side reform, more free market than the Tories have been.
Yeah, because the polling evidence would suggest that actually on issues like that, which have been in the Tories' ballpark for some time now, where they're saying, look, I trust the Labour Party more on these issues than I do the Conservative Party right now.
Listen, I think Keir Starmer has done a reasonable job. I certainly don't, and I'm broadly speaking supportive of a Labour government coming into power, but I don't...
No, you shock me. You shock me.
Listen, I don't back everything that Keir Starmer's done, but I think he is, to answer your question, I think he's widely seen as a responsible, strong leader. We saw that with some of the rebellions earlier in this week and the way that was handled. It was handled competently. I think voters will see a massive difference between Jeremy Corbyn, who turned me off as a Labour voter, and Keir Starmer. So I think the trust in the Labour Party is growing, and I think that's very significant.
But do you think we need to know more about what a Labour policy platform actually looks like? Because we don't
I would certainly like to, wouldn't you? I mean, we would all like to know that. I think Starmer has been quite clear, hasn't he, that his commitment was to detoxify the Labour Party after the disaster of 2019, show that the Tories are not worthy of office, and then start setting out his stall.
Do you think that's a tactical decision, Christian, where Sir Keir Starmer is keeping his cards close to his chest and watching the Conservative Party basically pull itself apart?
Oh, certainly, and I think it's remarkably easy to criticise some of the things that Labour have come out with. I mean, there are some aspects of, taxes on private schools, which it sounds like they've sort of spent 4 or 5 times over in other policy areas. So there's certainly that. I think there's also, it's important to say that the bar is incredibly low with Labour, not just Corbyn, but also Miliband. Labour have become very good at saying what they know will go down well, but that is a very different game to sticking to those promises and doing the right thing in office, and that remains to be seen. And my gut is he'll fold on a lot of his promises.
Just a final quick thing, we talk so much, don't we, about culture wars and, importantly, about community relations and so forth, and immigration. I think the election will be won or lost partly, or in a big part way, on the economy. So the conversation we're having now is absolutely critical.
Absolutely. We'd all like to feel less skint, wouldn't we? I mean, John's just written in and he says, I consider myself to be a Trussite, Darren, but I think cutting inheritance tax as a priority is a pretty poor idea. So, loads more on that and everything else that we've been covering today on gbnews.com, the fastest growing national news website in the UK. It's got the best analysis and opinion, as well as the latest breaking news. Folks, you're watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes. Loads more coming up on today's show. TikTok, it's a menace. It's blowing up with social media posts of Osama bin Laden and his tirade against the West. I'll be asking, do we need tougher platform measures to protect young people? All of that and more, you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, horror on social media this week as Osama bin Laden returned his letter to America. It went viral after being posted by left-wing users. In it, the terrorist leader said his killings of nearly 3,000 Americans in the September the 11th, 2001 terror attacks had been justified by the United States' support of Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. His words, not mine. The letter has since been removed from numerous online publications after several commentators said its manifesto had opened their eyes to the situation in the Middle East. But some have said that historical documents should not be suppressed. Well, joining me to discuss this is Toby Young, General Secretary of the brilliant Free Speech Union. Toby Young, thank you very much for your time. I mean, I must admit, this is making me question my penchant for free speech, Toby, because I think that young people being inculcated into this kind of ideology is really quite troubling.
Yes, it is quite troubling, Darren, but I'm not sure I buy into the theory that TikTok's algorithms are being manipulated by the Chinese Communist Party in order to sow discord and dissent in the West, particularly amongst young people. That's certainly been the cry of several Republican congressmen in the United States, and they cite the huge discrepancy between the number of posts on TikTok with the hashtag Free Palestine compared to the much smaller number of posts with the hashtag Stand With Israel. But in TikTok's defense, and I didn't think I'd be hearing myself say those words, Darren, that discrepancy, that ratio is equally skewed on Instagram and Facebook. And polling indicates that young people, including in the United Kingdom, 18 to 24-year-olds, side more with Gaza than they do with Israel in this particular conflict. In the YouGov poll last month, I think it was 39% of 18 to 24-year-olds supported Gaza and only 11% supported Israel. Now, you could say that's because they're getting their news about the conflict from platforms which are trying to steer them towards that point of view. But it looks to me to be more a symptom of the woke mind virus rather than the result of clever manipulation by TikTok. Unfortunately, the minds of many young people have been infected by wokery, by this new religious movement, if you like, whereby they think of the Palestinians as the oppressed and the Israelis as the oppressor. They think of Israel as a colonial settler power, and therefore they're siding with the oppressed, with the dispossessed, with refugees. I mean, you and I know that that's a completely one-sided version of what's happening in the Middle East. But I think it's that, not TikTok, and not manipulation on any of the social media platforms that accounts for the skew amongst young people towards the Gaza side in this conflict.
So it doesn't worry you that issues such as, and we've had the likes of Miriam Cates and others, a Conservative Member of Parliament, actually warning about issues such as gender ideology being pushed on these platforms. You don't think there's an argument to say, whilst the Chinese alternative for TikTok in China is an educational platform which talks about patriotism of the state and all the rest of it, where the version that we have across the West is a very different beast that, as you rightly say, some have argued is undermining the West.
Well, I'm a little bit loath to call for the banning of any social media platforms or state interference, too much state interference into those platforms. Louis Brandeis, the famous Supreme Court Justice, said in a landmark First Amendment case back in the beginning of the last century that the best remedy for bad speech is not silence, but more and better speech. Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
So is that an argument for all of us to get on TikTok, Toby?
That's right, Darren. We should get on TikTok. We should make the case for defeating Hamas and returning the Israeli hostages as powerfully as we can. We should attach the hashtag Stand With Israel to those posts and counter some of the propaganda that's being pumped out by the other side. I think that's the best solution.
So just very briefly, Toby, I wonder, what did you think about Elon Musk saying that he would ban from Twitter the chant for "From the River to the Sea," to actually argue that actually that's a genocidal chant?
Well, I think there is a case for banning that chant on Twitter because what does it mean, from the river to the sea? It means wiping out the state of Israel. And if you wipe out the state of Israel, the 7 million plus Jews in that part of the Middle East would be slaughtered by Islamist paramilitary groups like Hamas. So I can understand why he would want to ban that chant. But I think the standard has to be, Darren, that we tolerate speech, provided it's not a direct incitement to violence. And that's what that chant feels like to me.
Brilliant as ever, Toby. Thank you very much for your time. That's Toby Young at the Free Speech Union, a very worthwhile union. Matthew, I wonder, TikTok and the Twitter moves at the minute, it's all kicking off on social media. Where are you at on all of this?
Where am I personally? I think I'm too old for TikTok, apparently, so I haven't dabbled in TikTok myself. What I've seen in the news in the last few days, though, the idea that pro-Osama bin Laden mission statements have been circulating amongst young people on this particular social media platform is absolutely terrifying. And we cannot underestimate how impressionable young people are, not just young people, older people as well, but perhaps particularly youngsters. And that is very scary indeed. Is there a problem that our principal public spaces where we do conversations, where we do debate, which have far bigger audiences than shows like this, worthwhile though it is to have these sorts of debates, is there a problem that these are owned in some cases by individuals or by states? Yes. Am I deeply concerned that a lot of British young people are sharing memes and so forth on a site owned effectively by the Chinese state? I'm very concerned about it. And the final thing on Twitter, which is the platform I use along with Instagram, I am also horrified that the owner of Twitter,
Elon Musk,
well, he responded to a well-established anti-Semitic conspiracy theory by saying the actual truth.
Well, we'll come on to all of these topics in a bit, folks. You're watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes. Plenty more to come on today's show, but first, here's the news with Aaron.
It is 1:34. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. Qatar says just minor logistical issues now stand in the way of a deal that could see the release of dozens of hostages by Hamas. The Qatari Prime Minister signalled progress is being made, although Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists no deal has been reached. Qatar says it's continuing dialogue with both Israel and Hamas, and efforts are ongoing. More than 200 hostages were taken by Hamas on October the 7th. So far, 4 have been released and dozens have been killed. The Chancellor says the government's acting responsibly amid suggestions tax cuts will be announced in the autumn statement on Wednesday. Jeremy Hunt told GB News he won't introduce any kind of measure that risks fueling inflation after it was halved over the past year. It's been widely reported cuts to inheritance and income tax are being considered in an effort to boost the economy, but the Chancellor insists next week's statement will focus on growth. A woman who acted as a victor for people smugglers has been jailed for 7.5 years. 32-year-old Ujeza Kermakaj, who's from Albania, helped arrange small boat crossings from France to the UK for Albanian nationals. She was arrested at her home in Oxfordshire last year and will be deported upon her release from prison. And a Conservative MP found guilty of racial abuse has announced he's standing down at the next election. Bob Stewart racially abused a man after he allegedly told him to go back to Bahrain outside the Foreign Office last December. He surrendered the Tory whip during his appeal against the conviction. The Beckenham MP made no reference to the recent case, but said it had been an honour and a privilege to serve. We'll be back with more at the top of the next hour, or we can get more on our website now. That's gbnews.com.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you very much to you at home as well. We've got more coming up. GB News' Gloria De Piero sat down this week with former Cabinet member Nadine Dorries on the explosive allegations in her new book, The Plot. We'll be bringing you all the latest, but first, here's a quick look at the weather.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the new working week, we are going to start off rather grey and damp. For some of us, it will be drier midweek, but for all, it looks like it's going to turn colder as we head towards next weekend. Back to the here and now, we still are dominated by this huge area of low pressure. Note the tightly packed isobars indicating it's going to be fairly blustery as we end at Sunday. Quite a lot of cloud around with some outbreaks of rain, keeping a very close eye on this next area of rain, however, as it moves into parts of South Wales, southwestern England throughout the night. Could turn quite squally for a time. But with all the cloud and rain around, it's going to be another fairly mild one right across the UK. So we start Monday morning, potentially quite wet across parts of southern England, but that will clear off towards France as we head towards the middle part of the morning. That may briefly allow some sunnier spell to develop across parts of the Midlands, East Anglia for a time, but for a lot of the UK, it's going to be a fairly grey start to the new working week. Further outbreaks of rain, that may well be fairly persistent up across parts of northern Scotland. And with a northerly wind starting to develop, it will be slightly cooler than the weekend, but still on the mild side. Into Tuesday, another fairly grey picture for parts of England and Wales, risk of some outbreaks of rain in the east. Brighter and drier for Scotland and Northern Ireland. That will sink its way southwards into England and Wales as we go into Wednesday and Thursday.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Former Culture Secretary and Boris Johnson ally, my gosh, is she a Boris Johnson ally, Nadine Dorries, she has a new book out. It's called The Plot, which has definitely been making the headlines. GB News' very own Gloria De Piero sat down with the former Conservative MP on Tuesday after the shocking reshuffle, and this is what she had to say about Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister.
Is Rishi Sunak actually going to make a decision? What is he doing as Prime Minister? He's been taken to the point, over, as the book details, over 7 years. He came into the party. People were told 7 years ago he is going to be Prime Minister, he's going to be Chancellor first, 7 years ago. But he's never made a decision since he got there because these people have taken him there and they control him. And even now, today, he still didn't get to make the decision over who was going to be in his cabinet. William Hague's just done it. So what is the point of having Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister? Why don't we have William Hague? Or why don't we have Douglas Smith? These people who, make all the decisions. Rishi Sunak doesn't make the decisions. He doesn't move without, first of all, Dougie Smith saying he can, or making a decision unless Dougie Smith approves it.
So isn't it weird then that, Esther's a former colleague, both in Parliament and at GB News, Esther McVeigh, that they actually called a position or briefed that a position was the Minister for Common Sense. Surely that should sort of be the essence of the entire government. You have one person, and you can check that we have common sense in this government.
Do you know, I just want to say, I love Esther. And, she's from Liverpool and we're fellow Scousers. But honestly, it's such a cynical appointment. It's like, everyone's going to criticise us for just handing a job to, an old Etonian who wants to have his reputation rehabilitated. So I know the antithesis to that the argument against that will be, let's pop a northern girl with a Liverpool accent into cabinet, give her no portfolio or no responsibilities whatsoever, but just let's pop her in. And anyone who says, we can say, well, look, Esther McVeigh, who was educated, by the way, at a private school, Blue Coats private school in Liverpool, let's just pop her into the cabinet because that's the counter-argument to the posh boys. It's just so cynical, and I'm sure Esther has seen through that as well. But, I don't blame Esther for taking it.
OK, I'm going to say something that I recall from meeting you for the first time, and it was on the House. It won't be important to you, but it's stuck in my mind. It's kind. Don't worry. We're on the House of Commons terrace. It was 2010. I can't remember how you ended up chatting to me, but I just got in. I said, I don't really know what I'm doing. And you said, if you ever want any advice, feel free to ask me. And I was like, but we're in different parties. And you said this to me. You took me aside and you went, there's something bigger in here than political parties, and that's women. Which is great. But is that true? Is there sisterhood? Are you
yeah. And I think for women, politics is difficult. And it was harder in our days. So I came in 2005, Gloria. So I'd been through 2005 to 2010, which was, it was like being back in the dinosaur days. And I realised that as a woman, it's 10 times worse because your opinion was completely disregarded. You were totally spoken over. It was just shocking. And I realised that, and honestly, Gloria, I've said this, and I know feminists think it's a terrible thing for me to say, but I wouldn't want any of my daughters becoming MPs. I would not want them working in that place. I want them to work in organisations where they can have a chance at being equals and know that their opinion is heard. And that's what I want for my girls. I don't want my girls to go into an environment like Westminster, which is toxic. It is a toxic environment. It's full of unpleasant people. You know that. I know that. There are a lot of unpleasant people. There are good people as well, but they are drowned out by the machinations and the game playing and the plotting of those who are bad people, which really is, highlighting a few of those people is what my book's about.
Some of the things that you'd been told by the interviewees that you spoke to about in the book that happened in your party, an MP having sex on a billiards table with a prostitute while other MPs watched, an MP who I assume is still an MP who you were told gave a young woman a rape drug, who faced no sanction and went on to is this true? Is there any evidence? Because these are really serious things.
Oh yeah, it's true. I saw the police report. It's true.
Is this a sitting MP?
Yeah.
You've seen a police report?
Yeah.
And is this the one who gave the woman...
I'm not going to go into conversations about it, Gloria, because it's...
But there are two anecdotes. There's one where MPs watched...
Yeah.
And there's another one about an MP who gave a young woman a date rape drug.
Yeah.
And you've seen one of those police reports?
Yeah.
And that's as much as you're going to say, that's fine, but you know that...
That's as much as I can say on that one, given the information I've been given since the book came out.
OK.
But I actually saw I know people have said, why is she sitting on information like that to sell her book? Why didn't she go to the police about it? I got the information from the book because I saw the police report. Yeah, it's already in action.
Are you allowed to tell me if it's if the person in question is still an MP?
Yes.
They are?
Yeah. And the thing about that case, which is utterly shocking, is that my party were aware of what he'd done and he wasn't even given a rap on the knuckles. But then what he went on to do was to abuse and rape other women. So that's the, you know, a sexual, and, you know, Gloria, he was a sexual predator, and we know that Westminster is a place that seems to attract those kind of people, and they are everywhere. And, you know, when this woman was advised that she should go to the police, well, yes, but that's a very difficult thing for someone to do in the workplace, to take somebody else to the police, you know? And there should have been some kind of mechanism where that MP was hauled into, and the government or my party or whoever also called the police to say, we need to make you aware that we have received this complaint. And the police would have said, we need to speak to the woman in question. Absolutely right. But she would have felt some protection and some support if the party had also reported him to the police. Whether or not the police could take action on the party's complaint is a different issue, and I know that's a more technical issue, but at least that young woman would have felt that the party was on her side, and the party had an obligation, both morally, I think, and criminally, to do that, and they didn't. And Gloria, we've got to say, I know it's in both parties.
Oh, of course.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, final question. You've said you wouldn't want your daughters to go in there. We both went in there. We saw it for what it is. There's some good people. There's some bad people. There's some bad things that happen in there. Is there anything, if you had a magic wand question, we could clean up politics by doing this? Is there anything we can do?
Oh God, it's a big question, isn't it? So one of the issues is, I think the biggest problem is it's politics itself. You know, it's the pursuit of power, and it corrupts. And I have seen in the research for the book to what extent it corrupts. And there needs to be an overarching theme of decency, high standards, morals. Those overarching themes need to be what people use as their guiding light in politics. You know, is it moral? Is this decent? Are we reaching standards that the public expect of us? And if the answer is yes, then we're getting somewhere towards addressing how these problems occur within this vacuum. But at the moment, there is none of that. You know, we've got an immoral party which has abandoned all pretense at decency. And yeah, that's what's got to change.
Nadine Dorries, the only regret I have about this interview is that it is not twice as long. To quote the former Prime Minister at your book launch last night, go Nads. It has been a pleasure, and it's a great read. Nadine Dorries, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Gloria.
Fascinating as ever. Now, turning back to my panel, I've got Matthew Stadlin and Christian Calgie still with me now. Christian, she talks about her daughter and not letting her daughter in politics. She would hate that to happen. That takes me back to that TikTok conversation we were having earlier. I mean, you're on TikTok, you're 26 years of age. Do you recognise the perils of these social media apps?
Well, I have always taken the view, and I very much disagree with Nadine, because obviously when she was Culture Secretary, she was in charge of pushing through these big reforms to how social media works and clamping down on freedom of speech. I've always taken the view that social media is a mirror of society. I don't think it changes society. And I think that when we talk, for example, I will come back to the TikTok issues and bin Laden, but we talk about Twitter, we talk about online abuse. Well, I always make the point that 100 years ago, members of the public were voluntarily going to watch hangings, right? There are some members of the public, there's something in a lot of human beings that want to be slightly brutal and ruthless and have a bloodletting every so often. And I think that to try and legislate against some of the evils of social media is to try and clamp down on some innate human characteristics.
I'm not sure how you go about legislating, because I think we do need to protect freedom of speech, but I also think that social media platforms have very serious responsibilities. And I think, for example, with Twitter, which is a space I do know, since Elon Musk, and he would disagree with me on this and he'd challenge me about it, he'd want me to give specific examples, but as my personal experience of Twitter since he took over is that hate speech, bigotry, racism and so forth has ballooned.
Well, it depends what your definition of hate speech is, right? Because I'm
quite clear about what hate speech is. It's about hating other people according to their racial or sexual identities and so forth.
Well, but uploading a video on TikTok, right, if you say, well, actually, a bloke can never be a woman, right, that would get you thrown off the app.
I mean, if you want to go into the transgender issues, I'm very happy to. But just to come back to Christian on the point you made, I do think that people can be radicalised on social media. Yes, there might be in some people an innate desire for the brutal and so forth. I'm not sure people have an innate affinity for Osama bin Laden. And I think the fact that people seem to be being radicalised along those grounds in this country is because of social media use.
No, I think I can find common ground on there, and I've seen it personally. I see people who start off fairly moderate, and then the problem is, of course, it's very easy to fall into echo chambers and you become more extreme in whichever direction your politics is. And that is a problem. But I'm also yet to hear a solution which isn't ban social media.
All right, folks, loads more coming up on today's show as the NHS advertises for a 100k contract to embed anti-racist behaviour. Has the healthcare service finally lost the plot? All of that and more to come. I'm Darren Grimes and you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm Darren Grimes, and the NHS is now offering an £100,000 contract for an anti-racism consultancy service. The contract, posted by NHS Blood and Transplant, says the successful bidder will embed intentionally inclusive and anti-racist behaviours across our organisation. Well, joining me now is former Secretary of State for Health, Nadine Dorries. Stephen, thank you for your time. We've not got very long, unfortunately, but I'm wondering if you were Victoria Atkins in this position now, she's of course Health Secretary, would you be saying, come on, we can spend that 100k on something else?
I'd recognise, if I were Victoria, that this is a free hit for the headline writers. But I actually think that if you look behind the headlines, this is an important issue for the health service. What's important for the health service is that access to healthcare, access to opportunities to work in the health service, are blind to race, blind to culture and background, and address health need. And the health service isn't as good at that as it says it wants to be. And if it's trying to address those health inequalities, that's something that I think should have our support.
All right, so Stephen, you reckon that actually the NHS, we get told it needs more cash, it's cash-starved, that actually this isn't proof of that?
No, I don't think that, because there's lots of things in the health service. It needs to provide healthcare based on need, regardless.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to GB News Sunday. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Darren Grimes, and for the next hour I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, coming up this hour, he's not even been in the job for a week and already reports suggest that Foreign Secretary David Cameron wants to unlock billions of dollars for foreign aid. It's suggested that Mr Cameron says the UK has a moral mission to help poorer countries. We'll be asking, is he right, or does charity begin at home? Also, is our Nigel ready for a rumble in the jungle? The hit reality show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, it returns to our screens later on with Nigel Farage taking part in a special Outback challenge. He looks delighted. We'll have all the latest. And more embarrassment for the SNP. The Scottish Health Secretary has apologised for incurring an £1,000, I wish it was £11, data bill whilst using an iPad abroad. Could this spell danger for leader Humza Yousaf? And don't forget, your voice more important than mine. gbviews@gbnews.com is that email. I've got your emails up here in front of me now. Our socials, you can contact us at GB News. But first, here's the news with Aaron.
Afternoon to you. It's 2:02 here in the GB Newsroom. I'm Aaron Armstrong. Qatar says just minor logistical issues now stand in the way of a deal that could see the release of dozens of hostages held by Hamas. The Qatari Prime Minister signalled progress is being made, although Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists no deal has been reached. Qatar says it's continuing dialogue with both Israel and Hamas, and efforts are ongoing. More than 200 hostages were taken by Hamas on October the 7th. So far, 4 have been released and dozens have been killed. The Chancellor says the government's acting responsibly amid suggestions tax cuts will be announced in next week's autumn statement. Jeremy Hunt told GB News he won't introduce any kind of measure that risks fueling inflation after it was halved over the past year. It's been widely reported cuts to inheritance and income tax are being considered in an effort to boost the economy. But the Chancellor insists next week's statement will focus on growth.
We're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation, because we had a big victory last week when we delivered the Prime Minister's pledge to halve inflation. When he and I came to office, it was over 11%. Now it's 4.6%. People watching at home, their number one concern, they say in poll after poll, is the cost of living crisis. This makes a difference. So we're going to do this responsibly.
Well, Labour has criticised suggestions the government may cut taxes while also squeezing the welfare system when many people are struggling with the cost of living. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, says he wants to know how any tax cuts will be paid for.
We've said in the Labour Party that we want the tax burden to come down on working people. It's the highest it has been since the Second World War. We've had 25 Conservative tax rises in this Parliament alone, but we can only announce those tax cuts when they can be fully funded. And if the Chancellor is going to announce a tax cut on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at how he's been able to get the money to pay for that to happen.
Homeowners could be offered up to £1,000 per year off their household bills if they're prepared to live near new electricity pylons. The government is hoping the move will overcome planning objections and speed up its bid to install infrastructure for electric vehicles. The current estimate is 14 years. It could be worth up to over £10,000 over 10 years, over a decade for some, although the Treasury hasn't specified where that money will come from. A woman who acted as a fixer for people smugglers has been jailed for 7.5 years. 32-year-old Ujeza Kermakaj, who's from Albania, helped arrange small boat crossings from France to the UK for Albanian nationals. She was arrested at her home in Oxfordshire last year and will be deported upon her release from prison. 700,000 pupils in England are still being taught in poorly maintained or potentially unsafe buildings because of crumbling concrete. The Public Accounts Committee says it's limiting students' educational achievements. In its report, the cross-party group described a shocking lack of detail from the Department of Education, meaning the true scale of the crisis remains a mystery. The government, though, says it is rebuilding and its programme is proceeding ahead of schedule. A Conservative MP found guilty of racial abuse has announced he is standing down at the next election. Bob Stewart racially abused a man after he allegedly told him to go back to Bahrain outside the Foreign Office last December. He surrendered the Tory whip while he appealed against that conviction. The MP for Beckenham, though, made no reference to the recent case but said it had been an honour and a privilege to serve. Minibuses and electric vehicles have been sent to Albania as part of a deal to return foreign prisoners. The arrangement will see 200 Albanian nationals currently jailed in England and Wales sent back home for the rest of their sentence. The UK has also agreed to help modernise Albania's prison system. The overall deal is expected to cost around £8 million, which the government says will save money for Britain's prisons. The biggest prostate cancer screening trial in decades has begun. After a £42 million funding boost, the innovative trial will use methods like MRI scans to detect prostate cancer much earlier. Thousands of men across the country are participating, with 1 in 10 to be from non-white communities who are much more at risk. This is GB News. We're across the UK on TV, digital radio and on your smart speaker too. Now it's back to Darren.
Thank you, Aaron. Let's get stuck into the topics for this hour. After just under a week in the job, Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron has reportedly pledged to unlock billions for foreign aid and that the UK has a moral mission to help the world's poor. Even though this government closed the Department for International Development and slashed the foreign aid budget, the former Prime Minister is said to want to push for the restoration of the aid status in British foreign policy. So can Cameron put foreign aid back on the agenda? Should he? I'm joined now by the political commentator Alex Armstrong. Alex, my own personal view on this is quite clear. We are skint, right, all of us as a nation, and we can't afford to put the heating on. We're struggling to pay the bills. And this right now, as a policy proposal, I tell you, the mailbox is going absolutely wild, Alex.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised GB News viewers are up in arms about this. I am too. I think it's absolutely bonkers. Right in the middle of a cost of living crisis where inflation is still twice as high as it should be, let's bear that in mind, David Cameron has come back, been dug out from the back garden somewhere, one of his back garden where he spent 25k probably to build that shed to write his book, has been brought back into government. And, you know, Darren, funnily enough, you made that slight Freudian slip there where you said Cameron's government. Well, it certainly feels like Cameron's government, doesn't it? It feels like Rishi is bending over backwards for David Cameron, left, right and centre. We're seeing a complete reversal of any policies that make give Rishi Sunak's government any character whatsoever. You know what I find most upsetting about all of this is that David Cameron says we have a moral obligation. Well, to who and why? And this is a man, let's not forget, that got 10 million from Greensill for lobbying the government. If anyone's going to talk to me about morals, I hope it's not David Cameron.
Well, and of course, potentially, reportedly, getting a little bit too close to China in trying to make a bob or two. But I'm wondering, you know, what is the plan here? Is he going to bring back or seek to bring back the 0.7% of GDP being spent every year on foreign aid?
Yeah, well, Rishi Sunak's already committed to 0.5, so let's just bear that in mind. So that's already a commitment he's made. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Cameron uses some sort of inflation as excuse to up that budget even further. And in 2022, we spent £12.8 billion British pounds on ODA, which is official development assistance. So we're already spending a fortune whilst we're asking the British taxpayer to rein it in and pay more in taxes. And then you've got Jeremy Hunt coming out saying we've got to be responsible with our money. Well, what policy are they going for fiscally here? Because I'm not quite clear. Do we have to be responsible with our money and save, or do we need to be spending it? And if we do, why are we not spending it on fixing the schools that the Tories have neglected for the last 10 years, for example? It seems to be that this current government that's in the middle of a crisis of identity doesn't even understand where its fiscal policy should lie.
Yeah, I mean, Alex Dean has written in, he says the Tory party are just trolling us now. And then Cheryl has said, foreign aid, yes, we should give more aid to India. She's been sarcastic, by the way. She says, to help with their space missions. And they can purchase some more of our good old British companies like British Steel, Jaguar Land Rover, etc., etc. There is a point here. You know, it's all well and good to say we need to be giving more British taxpayer cash to the likes of Gaza, for example. But how do you make sure that it doesn't go into making rockets by Hamas?
No, and this is the viewers are quite right again. You know, we've been giving money to far more developed countries than us. We don't have a space program. Let's just bear that in mind. I actually made this point on your show in the summer, Darren, when India did land their rocket on the moon, and I looked at how much money the UK had given in aid to India over that time, even if it was dressed up as, you know, business investments. And it is really massively hypocritical for the Tories, who are, you know, sitting here telling us all to be fiscally responsible. And, you know, that has been David Cameron's line since he was in government. You know, we were all tightening our budgets, slashing benefits for the poorest people. And yet we're managing to find money in the back of the sofa to give out billions to Ukraine, to Gaza, to India, to even China up until very recently. And now we're seeing all those countries that we've been giving billions to actually excel us. So rather than investing in our own country, we're more worried about investing overseas. It screams to me, and I'm sure you'll agree, Darren, it screams to me like this country has lost its way. We seem to be now using money to buy favours rather than using any form of British intellect or soft power to actually have any influence in the world. And it's quite a sad state of affairs.
And just finally and briefly, Alex, I'm wondering, do you actually argue that in doing this, well, a lot of viewers are saying, what about all of the money we're spending, for example, on those arriving here illegally and all the rest of it? Maybe when they sort that out, then they can start lecturing us on sending money abroad.
Yeah, quite. I mean, you know, Darren, I think the thing that really incenses people about this situation, and you said this beautifully at the start of the conversation here, charity starts at home, and we have a lot of issues in this country, and the taxpayer we are actually a very generous, very charitable country, one of the most charitable in the world. Let's just remember that. But you can't keep on taking the British public sympathy for granted. You keep on pressing the buttons and going, you must be more sensible, you must look after your money, we must tax you more, but we're going to go and give it all away. And we're going to let all these illegal migrants come over here. We're going to do nothing about it. We're going to invest that money into a black hole policy like Rwanda, which we have no intention of actually delivering upon. And then the British public just get fed up and go, well, where are my taxes going? You know?
Well, indeed. Common Sense Crusader, Alex Armstrong, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. Christian Calgie, I want to come to the wet in the room, and I want to ask you, you must you are a big fan of David Cameron, right? Do you support him on this?
I wouldn't say I'm a fan. I certainly miss what was 6 years of vaguely quiet, competent government, right? He was good on comms. He ran fairly a smooth ship until it hit the buffers in 2016 with that referendum. So I hope that it brings an element of stability. I said on Monday, you know, when I was asked about how David Cameron would square the fact that he's been quite outspoken against the government on a number of policy issues, I said he'll probably fall in line on things like HS2, but behind the scenes, he will now be lobbying for that 0.7% of foreign aid to come back, because it was one of his sort of proud babies of his time in government, and was furious when Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak cut it in response to the cost of living crisis.
And of course, under him is Andrew Mitchell, who was a big fan of all of this.
Oh, massive. Yeah. So the Foreign Office is now one unified, dominant figure pushing for this. And I'll be very interested to see how Jeremy Hunt tries to reject it because the government is right. Nothing is improved in terms of the public finances since the cut was made. I will just say, I think it's important not to be too simplistic on foreign aid. It can be useful as a soft power tool, and in terms of creating better economies in areas to reduce, for example, extremism. However, I remember when DFID, the Foreign Aid Department, was abolished, I said it should have been put in the Department for Trade, not the Foreign Office, because the single best thing you can do for foreign countries' economies is open up free trade with them rather than state handouts, as the government's current ideology is.
Well, some, Matthew, would argue that actually trade, not aid, is what we ought to be doing.
I think it's possible to do both. Just a couple of things. First of all, you said Alex, who's very coherent in what he believes. You called him, I think, a common-sense crusader, which to my mind means you agree with him. I think that I speak common sense as well. And also, there's nothing wet about me, I can promise you. On the substance of this...
Well, it was Christian I was calling
well, I imagine you, if you think Christian's wet, you probably think I'm even wetter. But listen, now, on the substance of this is going to absolutely horrify the right wing of the Tory party. It will no doubt wind up some GB News viewers as well. Do I think that Rishi Sunak knows whether he's coming or going? Of course he doesn't. One minute he's trying to woo the red wall or the blue wall up in the north and the northeast. The next minute he's trying to woo the home counties. So he's lost as a Prime Minister, and I think we can all agree he's going as a Prime Minister at the next general election. Why does foreign aid matter? It matters because it gives us influence in the world. It matters because we do have a moral responsibility beyond our own borders. We are not a country that lives in isolation. It is, as Christian says, partly about soft power. And let me give you one example. We are, as a country, desperately trying to stop these dangerous boat crossings, aren't we? I think we can all agree that that is what is at least being attempted. One way of making it less likely that people are desperate to get to this country, and it's a great country, hence why people want to get here, is by investing in the war-torn countries from whence they come. And if we put money into those areas, and if we try to help those economies and those societies, then we will live in a better world, a safer world, and a world, we hope, in which fewer people will want to risk their lives in coming to Britain.
So, I mean, Christian, a lot of viewers will be saying, I've no doubt, well, look, that's all well and good, but how much money have the international community sent into Gaza, for example? It ain't worked wonders there, has it? It's a hotbed of extremism.
No, and I was in Israel earlier this year, before there was any sign that this war was about to start. And even then, you know, I was speaking to people in Israel, and there were major concerns about to what extent, once foreign aid has entered the country, we can ensure that it is being spent at least, you know, on the projects that we want it to be spent on. And there's always been a concern with Palestine and Hamas that they have been siphoning off funds. And we've even seen today, you know, water, electricity, food are still being siphoned off by Hamas. And we simply are not at the moment capable to ensure when we give that aid, when we're trying to be humane and generous and charitable, that it is going towards the people of Gaza who desperately need that support. And that is really one of the reasons why Hamas have to be dealt with in Gaza.
So, I mean, do you think Daily Express readers will be listening to what Matthew had to say earlier when he was saying, look, there are millions of people in this country struggling to actually pay their bills at the minute, and they'll be saying, well, look, we need to direct this money to helping people here before we consider helping people abroad?
No, absolutely, and that's why I say I think the government set out a number of tests that have to be met for it to go back up to 0.7. I don't believe those tests are anywhere near being met, so it would be the wrong time to put foreign aid back up to 0.7. But on a political point, I said when Cameron was made Foreign Secretary, the thing the right are going to be looking out for is proof of Cameron's influence not just on foreign policy, but on Treasury policy, on political tactics, and to what extent Number 10 and the Treasury yield to these calls to put foreign aid back up is going to be a big test of whether Rishi Sunak is his own man or whether he is just Cameron's laptop.
Well, he's not his own man. I mean, I think surely we can agree on that. He sort of flaps around with the wind. As I said, 1 minute he's trying to appeal to the populist right. That's why one of the reasons why he brought in Suella Braverman in the first place as Home Secretary and then was forced to sack her. The next minute he's trying to appeal to the centre, which he knows surely he has to have some sort of grip on, some sort of persuasiveness with if he wants to win the next election. So what Rishi Sunak is focused on at any 1 minute is his own electoral chances, his own interests. And I think those electoral chances are toast.
OK, Matthew Stadlin there, thank you for that. And Christian Calgie before him, thank you very much too. You can get loads more on that story on our website, gbnews.com, fastest growing national news website in the UK. It's got the best analysis and opinion, as well as all the latest breaking news. Now, loads more coming up here on today's show as we cover Farage heading into the jungle and the trials that await him. I'm Darren Grimes and you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, Series 23 of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here begins tonight with all of your second favourite Geordie broadcasters. Now, it's coming tonight from the Australian jungle. It's set for a dramatic launch as high-profile contestants include Jamie Lynn Spears, the sister of pop star Britney, and someone that we know closer to home, our very own GB News presenter Nigel Farage, who'll be competing in the gruesome challenges Down Under. Well, joining me now to discuss is the reporter and broadcaster Stephanie Tetchy. Stephanie, thank you very much for your time. Steph, we've seen images, and I wonder if we can just get them on screen here, of Nigel in what appears to be some form of gunge. What do you think that is? Is he searching for stars or something?
Yes, well, basically, as you said, Darren, it is going to be a dramatic start to the season 23 of I'm a Celebrity, and no one's been spared, especially Nigel. So tonight, we're going to see Nigel, Josie Gibson and Nella Rose far in the outback, 2,000 miles away from the rest of the campmates, where they have to win stars in order for the camp to eat. So if they don't win this challenge, which looks pretty slimy, right now Nigel looks good in a pink shirt, but from what I've seen by the end of it, he's going to be covered in gunge from head to toe. So it's not going to be great. And I think this is only the beginning of the embarrassing challenges that Nigel may potentially be put up for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, Steph, the Daily Mail are reporting that he will be exempt from some Bush Tucker trials due to previous sustained injuries. But this looks very much, to me, like he's very much taken part in Bush Tucker trials, does it not?
Well, he is, but the fact is the producers are going to have to make it hard for Nigel because, unfortunately, he did have that plane crash in 2010 and he had his neck reconstructed. So usually the contestants will be skydiving into the camp, but which Nigel can't do. He can't do any of the weightlifting kind of trials. So I can imagine the producers are really going to be pushing the boat on what he can do because, as we saw with Matt Hancock last year, when you do have a divisive political character that's going to be on the camp, the public are going to be voting to put Nigel through his paces. So you are going to see some ugly things, whether it's him eating kangaroo testicles or he may be lying in a coffin full of rats. They are going to think of the most ugliest things to do to Nigel.
Yes, indeed. I mean, Stephanie, do you reckon actually he has a chance? Do you think is it a primarily younger audience that's tuning in large numbers, of course, to watch I'm a Celeb?
Well, surprisingly, last year, when Matt Hancock came on, everyone was like, he's going to be this hate figure due to COVID and how he handled it. But by the end of it, he became a bit of a TikTok sensation. You had a lot of Generation Z who had crushes on Matt Hancock, and he managed to turn the tide a bit. And I think that Nigel will do the same. He's always said that he felt he's been demonized over the past few years. So you might be surprised. He might get a new following from Generation Z, and obviously he's got a lot of support from the GB News viewers. So I think that will all cross over, and I would not be surprised if we see Nigel in the final.
Indeed. Well, Steph, we'll see what happens. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. Stephanie Tetchy there, thank you very much for your time. Now, coming back to my panel, Christian Calgie and Matthew Stadlin there, do you think you can do it?
I can't wait, and I think it will be... I think it's very likely he gets to the final. Whether he can push past that third place that Matt Hancock came to, it's difficult because ultimately the audience is always going to be mainly about the celebrity, but it's certainly a better strategy to be noticed. Nigel is certainly going to be noticed, and he is almost certainly going to do every trial that the public are allowed to vote him to do for the next couple of weeks. So it's going to be gruelling. He's going to earn that pay packet, certainly.
Oh, they'll make sure of it. Matthew, do you actually reckon that this could be a beneficial thing for Farage?
So I could have been in the jungle with him.
Oh, wow. This year?
Yeah, a TV producer friend said they were going to put someone right-wing there, and maybe they should consider me to give a bit of balance. I'll tell you what, Nigel Farage has said some horrendous things in his time. I'm not a fan, but I've met him on numerous occasions. We both used to be presenters at the same channel, and I enjoyed talking to him. He has the common touch, there's no doubt about it. And although he's a vastly divisive figure, I think he will have enough support out there to make sure he wins it.
Well, I think he's brilliant and I'll be definitely supporting him all the way. But, folks, you're watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes. We've got loads more coming up. But first of all, we're going to get a news update with Aaron.
Very good afternoon to you. It's 28 minutes past 2. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. The Qatari Prime Minister says only minor differences stand between Hamas and Israel agreeing to a hostage release deal. He says the obstacles are practical and logistical. Now, it hasn't been confirmed by Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but in the last few minutes, the Israeli ambassador to the US, Michael Herzog, has said in an interview on US television that Israel's hopeful a significant number of hostages could be released by Hamas in the coming days. More than 200 hostages were taken by Hamas on October the 7th. So far, 4 have been released. 1 managed to be recovered by the IDF and dozens have been killed. The Chancellor says the government is acting responsibly amid suggestions tax cuts will be announced in the autumn statement on Wednesday. Jeremy Hunt told GB News he won't introduce any kind of measure that risks fueling inflation after halving it over the past year. It has been widely reported that cuts to inheritance and income tax are being considered in an effort to boost the economy. The Chancellor, though, insists next week's statement will be all about growth. Homeowners could be offered up to £1,000 per year off their household bills if they're prepared to live near new electricity pylons. The government's hoping the move will overcome planning objections and speed up the infrastructure needed for electric vehicles. It could be worth up to £10,000 over a decade for some. The Treasury, though, hasn't specified where that money's going to come from. And a woman who acted as a fixer for people smugglers has been jailed for 7.5 years. 32-year-old Ujeza Kermakaj, who's from Albania, helped arrange small boat crossings from France to the UK for Albanian nationals. She was arrested at her home in Oxfordshire last year and will be deported upon her release from prison. We'll have more in about half an hour's time, or there's more now on our website, gbnews.com.
Thank you, Aaron. Lots more to come on today's show as the SNP Health Minister apologises for racking up an 11 grand data bill on his iPad. I'll be debating the culture of the SNP up in Holyrood. Are they untouchable? And how much are they governing in Scotland's best interests? We'll discuss. First of all, though, let's have a check on what the weather's up to.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the new working week, we are going to start off rather grey and damp. For some of us, it will be drier midweek, but for all, it looks like it's going to turn colder as we head towards next weekend. Back to the here and now, we still are dominated by this huge area of low pressure. Note the tightly packed isobars indicating it's going to be fairly blustery as we end at Sunday. Quite a lot of cloud around with some outbreaks of rain, keeping a very close eye on this next area of rain, however, as it moves into parts of South Wales, southwestern England throughout the night. Could turn quite squally for a time. But with all the cloud and rain around, it's going to be another fairly mild one right across the UK. So we start Monday morning, potentially quite wet across parts of southern England, but that will clear off towards France as we head towards the middle part of the morning. That may briefly allow some sunnier spell to develop across parts of the Midlands, East Anglia for a time, but for a lot of the UK, it's going to be a fairly grey start to the new working week. Further outbreaks of rain, that may well be fairly persistent up across parts of northern Scotland. And with a northerly wind starting to develop, it will be slightly cooler than the weekend, but still on the mild side. Into Tuesday, another fairly grey picture for parts of England and Wales, risk of some outbreaks of rain in the east. Brighter and drier for Scotland and Northern Ireland. That will sink its way southwards into England and Wales as we go into Wednesday and Thursday.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Scottish Health Secretary has apologised for incurring an £11,000 data bill. What was he watching whilst using an iPad abroad? Michael Matheson ran up a huge data roaming charge while on holiday in Morocco last year. The Falkirk West MSP told Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, that his sons used his iPad to watch football and admitted mistakes were made, saying he would pay the money back. The news comes as the SNP engages in some soul-searching, as many former members say the party has become unthinking under Nicola Sturgeon's leadership, now, of course, in the control of Humza Yousaf. Well, joining me to discuss this is the Scottish political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail, Michael Blackley. Michael, thank you for your time, as ever. I'm wondering what on earth the football could have been. Was he watching the entire run-through of the Champions League? This is extraordinary.
Well, it has been an absolutely astonishing story. The truth about this only came out on Thursday when Michael Matheson made a statement to MSPs, and he explained that his two sons had been watching football on 2 days when there was pretty heavy data use while he was on a family holiday in Morocco. Until then, he had spent 2 whole weeks insisting that this use was all down to parliamentary purposes. So the truth was really dragged out following several days of controversy about this, and we only eventually learned that it was his sons watching. It was an Old Firm game on January the 2nd, which seems to have been the match that was mainly responsible for this £11,000 bill.
It's absolutely extraordinary. There's just a massive sum of money. And then how did it end up that cost may have to be borne out by the taxpayer?
Yeah, so this was Michael Matheson. He's a government minister, but this was him using his parliamentary device. So the Scottish Parliament would normally pick up the cost of parliamentary devices, even while he had taken it on a family holiday. It remains a bit unclear as to exactly why he took that device there in the first place, because while MSPs might claim that they're working every day of the year, I think reasonably there's probably very little constituency business to be done over the December-January Christmas holiday period. And given that this bill was racked up in his 1 week that he was in Morocco during that period, some of the bill on January the 2nd, I don't think he'd be expected to be dealing with too many constituency matters. Then there's also been questions in this for Humza Yousaf as well, though, because he's defended Michael Matheson from the start, and he insisted it was a legitimate parliamentary expense from the start. And even when he was eventually told the truth, he was still defending Michael Matheson and insisting that the case is closed about his conduct. So there's real questions about how this has been handled from the SNP. Have they been brushing it under the carpet, hoping that the truth didn't come out? Now it has come out, and people are pretty angry about it.
Well, I bet they are. I bet they are. Michael Blackley, thank you very much. That's Michael Blackley there from the Scottish Daily Mail. Always worth your time. Matthew, I'm wondering, well, the SNP, dare I say, and I put my cards on the table. I'm not a massive fan of the SNP. But they are pretty snookered at the minute, aren't they?
I'm not a massive fan of the SNP. I think the only winners out of this story, if you leave the detail aside, and you had quite a lot of the detail accounted for there, the winners are Labour, surely, aren't they? Because Labour are going to struggle to win an overall majority, I would have thought, without making major gains in Scotland. If you think about the Blair years and the 3 successive election victories that he managed for the Labour Party, that was partly on the back of unquestioned support almost in Scotland. And then when the SNP took a stranglehold on Scottish politics, that spelt disaster for Labour. The SNP now seem to be in a bit of a muddle. We had Nicola Sturgeon stepping down, now we've got this issue, and I think Labour will be cock-a-hoop if they don't seize on this now to win serious gains at the next election. They'll only have themselves to blame.
I mean, Calgi, Christian even, I'm so used to calling you Calgi.
What you want.
Do you actually think that Humza Yousaf has, well, he's basically had his day in that, you know, the end is nigh?
Well, I think the problem for the SNP is that the party, it was sort of rotten to the core before Nicola Sturgeon stepped down.
Don't hold back, Christian.
They've managed to paper over the cracks with quite a charismatic leader in Nicola Sturgeon. The problem is that facade has now gone, and I think the voters are now seeing the party for what it is. And it's not SNP specific, right? It's any party that's been in power for a considerable length of time. It does start to rot like this. It starts to smell. You start having these sleaze stories, whether it was Labour in the late noughties, whether it's the Tories now or in the ahead of 97. So that's really, this is not a story that in 10 years' time people are going to remember, but it adds up to that wider sense that obviously you've got the police investigations, the wider SNP finances, you've got its weird coalition with the Greens and their mouthing off. You've got the slide in the opinion polls, the prediction Labour may overtake them in seats. So once again, not only does it compound that, it also sucks the oxygen out of the room for Humza Yousaf, who would obviously rather be talking about anything else.
Caveat to that is that, of course, Scottish independence is a big single issue.
Yeah.
And you'll still have people who want independence.
Indeed. Loads more coming up, though, on today's show, folks. Sinn Féin, they've been calling for Israel's ambassador to Ireland to be expelled until a ceasefire is enforced. It's madness. All of that and more to come. I'm Darren Grimes, and you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, Sinn Féin, biggest party in Northern Ireland, they've called for the Israeli ambassador to Ireland to be expelled until a ceasefire is imposed between Israel and Hamas. On Friday, the party president, Mary Lou McDonald, said the deepening scale of the crisis means sanctions are needed. But Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has said that there will be no temporary ceasefire until Israeli hostages are released from Gaza. You might well argue that's fair enough. So what's behind Sinn Féin's hardline pro-Palestinian stance? Well, joining me now is the executive editor of Belfast Telegraph, John Laverty. John, thank you very much for your time. I'm wondering, we saw the scenes, extraordinary scenes of the Palestinian ambassador to Ireland receiving a standing ovation at the Sinn Féin conference there. I think we've got some pictures of that took place. Why is it that that's taking place, John? It just strikes me as absolutely extraordinary, and surely as Northern Ireland voters may well be a little unnerved by that.
There's a lot of people have been very confused recently about Sinn Féin, funnily enough. Them calling for the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador, to be kicked out of Ireland is actually nothing new. It's been going on for a couple of years now. But remarkably, they changed their stance about a couple of weeks ago, because when several councils in Northern Ireland voted for the Israeli ambassador, to call for the Israeli ambassador to be expelled from Ireland, Sinn Féin councillors actually did not vote on that. They actually abstained. Now, this came as quite a shock to a lot of Republicans. If you know Northern Ireland, the Unionists and the Loyalists are very, very much behind Israel, whereas the Republicans and Nationalists are behind Palestine. It's just as binary as that. Not so much in Southern Ireland and the Republic, because it's basically all Palestinian based. So calling for the ambassador of Israel to be expelled is nothing actually new. Although it's not going to happen, because there was a vote in the Dáil a couple of days ago, and it was reasonably well defeated. I think they're going to keep certainly going to keep those channels open. But Ireland was one of the last places in the world to have an Israeli ambassador. So it's they've been siding with Palestine for a long time, especially since 1967, and nothing's going to change that way.
John, why is it then that there is this proxy where, as you rightly say, you'll see in loyalist communities and unionist areas, you'll see Israeli flags flying even outside of people's gardens. Yep. And then the reverse, of course, for supporters of a united Ireland, you'll see Palestinian flags. When did this happen, and how do you reckon it happened? Because to a lot of us here in mainland GB, you're thinking, why on earth are they flying a foreign flag?
Yeah, it can be a little bit confusing, but this proxy has been going on for quite a while, but it's very pronounced now. Loyalists side with Israel because they believe that they're surrounded by a hostile nation, if you like, i.e. the Republic of Ireland. I mean, it's rather ridiculous when you think about it, but that's the way they say. Whereas the Republicans and the Nationalists side with the Palestinian side, because they believe that some of their land, i.e. Northern Ireland, has been taken away from them the same way as Israel result in a lot of the Palestinian land being taken away. So it's a proxy war. It's a silly thing because nobody's going to die here because of because they're siding with one side or the other. But that explains it. So if you travel around Northern Ireland and see the Israeli flags, you know you're in a loyalist Protestant area, and vice versa with the other side.
Just very briefly, have the Irish government actually come out and said that Hamas are a terrorist organisation?
No, and
that's quite extraordinary in and of itself, is it not?
Well, it's been that way for quite a while, and I don't believe they are. When I say I don't believe they are, it doesn't mean I don't believe they are, but I don't believe the Irish side of things are going to go that far.
Right. Okay. I see what you mean. Yeah, John, you were about to make a really shocking admission there, but John Laverty, thank you very much from the Belfast Telegraph. There, a great paper. Christian, I want to come to you first of all. Do you know what I'm sick of? Being lectured to by Irish politicians about everything from Brexit to goodness only knows what, making out that Britain is some kind of backwater, when they can't even bring themselves to call Hamas a terrorist organisation.
Well, exactly. I mean, you seem surprised that unionists in Northern Ireland will be supporting Israel. I mean, unionists have had to fight against terrorism in Northern Ireland for decades, and it doesn't surprise me at all that they will be sending a signal of solidarity with Israel. I think it's genuinely concerning for Britain to have a neighbour who have consistently not just got foreign policy wrong, but actually quite offensively so. I mean, I always cite the example, Ireland as a country sent a commiseration letter to Germany after Hitler killed himself. I mean, they have an astonishing foreign policy track record, and this is just yet another one of them seemingly largely siding with the wrong side. I mean, I'm glad, by the way, it's worth noting that in the end, Ireland voted against expelling the Israeli ambassador. But the fact that I think it was around 55 members of the Irish Parliament voted to do so against 85, it's just really worrying.
Yeah, I mean, this is saying nothing about Ireland's foreign policy, for which obviously I'm not remotely responsible. But I would just say, I mean, we haven't got the best foreign policy track record ourselves. I voted for New Labour, but we went to a war in Iraq, which many people think was an illegal war. We didn't exactly help in Libya under David Cameron's leadership. So I think we've got to get our own house in order. As far as these sort of allegiances that crop up over the Israel-Hamas conflict, and by the way, I'll say straight up, Hamas is a death cult. It's not just a terror organisation, it's a death cult that's committed to killing Jews, wiping Israel off the map, and is prepared to endure the most terrible suffering of its own people for its own psychotic end. So let's get that absolutely clear. But it's interesting because you see a lot of Indian people on Twitter supporting Israel because they see Israel, some of these people, as a sort of bulwark against Muslims. You will see people in Malaysia, not all of them, of course, supporting Palestine and perhaps even Hamas because they are anti-Semitic, a lot of these people. It's interesting to look at South Africa. I mean, some people in South Africa, perhaps a lot of people in South Africa, have sympathy for the Palestinians because they, like Amnesty International, see Israel as an apartheid state. I don't call Israel an apartheid state. I think if we just come back to the issue of what's actually happening on the ground over there, after the atrocities of October the 7th, the unspeakable savagery that was witnessed, the question was, how is Israel going to respond? And there was a really interesting, well-written piece by Matthew Paris in the Saturday Times yesterday, in which he said, look, I'm not a military expert. I don't know what it takes to get rid of Hamas. What I do know is that Israel is losing support internationally because the figures coming out of Gaza of the deaths of children, which aren't widely contested, 5,000 if they are to be believed, is losing Israel the international PR war.
OK. I mean, Christian, do you agree with that? Because, I mean, a lot of the BBC articles that I've been reading, they seem to quote Hamas as a verifiable source.
Israel was always going to lose the so-called PR war. I mean, the moment they started hitting back at Hamas, people, you could tell which way this was going. I think there are many, many people in the West, on the centre and the centre-left, who essentially wanted Israel to have a couple of days of solemn remembrance in memory of the people that were killed in that pogrom, and then move on without any repercussions. That's really the only way Israel wouldn't have been subject to abuse and
there might be a middle
attack.
way, though, mightn't there, between 2 days of silence and 5,000 children dead? To me, a Palestinian child is worth every much as an Israeli child, and both of those children are worth as much as my child.
The only people that are responsible for deaths in Gaza are Hamas.
That's simply not true. You might as well be a spokesman for the Israeli government.
Well, you're citing Hamas death
The United Nations basically upholds this. Well, OK, let's write off the United Nations
organisation that has terrorist and dictatorship states on its Human Rights Council.
Do you think any number of children in Palestine can be killed, should be killed, in the name of eradicating Hamas?
I think Israel gave every resident of Gaza an opportunity to get out, and Hamas prevented it.
An hour or two.
That's all we've got time for, unfortunately. That could have gone on and on. Matthew Stadlin and Christian Kagi, thank you for your time today. Folks, you have been watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes. Thank you for your company, and again, my panel. Don't go anywhere, though, because Nana's up next. First of all, it's the weather.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the new working week, we are going to start off rather grey and damp. For some of us, it will be drier midweek, but for all, it looks like it's going to turn colder as we head towards next weekend. Back to the here and now, we still are dominated by this huge area of low pressure. Note the tightly packed isobars indicating it's going to be fairly blustery as we end at Sunday. Quite a lot of cloud around with some outbreaks of rain. Keeping a very close eye on this next area of rain, however, as it moves into parts of South Wales, southwestern England throughout the night. Could turn quite squally for a time. But with all the cloud and rain around, it's going to be another fairly mild one right across the UK. So we start Monday morning, potentially quite wet across parts of southern England, but that will clear off towards France as we head towards the middle part of the morning. That may briefly allow some sunnier spell to develop across parts of the Midlands, East Anglia for a time, but for a lot of the UK, it's going to be a fairly grey start to the new working week. Further outbreaks of rain, that may well be fairly persistent up across parts of northern Scotland. And with a northerly wind starting to develop, it will be slightly cooler than the weekend, but still on the mild side. Into Tuesday, another fairly grey picture for parts of England and Wales. Risk of some outbreaks of rain in the east. Brighter and drier for Scotland and Northern Ireland. That will sink its way southwards into